There's still time if you want to participate in filmfebruary.com, a unique and cool contest I'm helping judge with a panel of really great YouTubers. Check out the website and my video that I'll link in the description and the end card. Thank you. I just got to remember not to step on it or drop it. Watch me drop my Contax G1 while I talk about my favorite 100 ISO films. Ready to roll or skate?
Ready to roll.
Things started off pretty retro with this great tracksuit Allie got for my grandmother. You should have seen me try to skate. Actually, I hope no one else ever sees that. It was horrible. I was too afraid to ask when her grandmother wore the tracksuit because I was afraid maybe it was a time when I was a lot older than I feel comfortable admitting. The location was mostly chosen because she could move around in the parking lot if we wanted to have some space for her to roll around. I chose this particular spot there because of the large area of open shade without too much background to blow out and to provide visual distraction. I wanted the focus to be on her, in other words. Allie was not very sure on her skates, a feeling I'm too familiar with, so I decided to play it safe and pose her casually. I say quote-unquote pose her, but in reality it was more of an agreement to use a certain spot and stance, and then for me to modify it in ways that were more classically pleasing to the viewer. My framing also played into this, of course. I needed to be sure to include or not include her skates, and to be cognizant of the background being distracting or too bright, etc. I chose Lomography 100 and 120 medium format in my Bronica ETRS to vibe with the 80s and maybe the early 90s look. The film is very likely a Kodak gold emulsion of some kind, if not just the consumer gold you get out and about. But anyway, it's evocative of the era for me, a 90s kid in other words. Gotta get some skates in there. In the Contax G1 that you saw briefly when I was putting my cameras on the ground, I opted for some Cinestill 50D. It's a much more modern emulsion, but the absence of rimjet promises the potential for highlight flaring, and its flatter profile as far as contrast goes provides the potential for grading for me to match it if needed to the Lomography 100. Despite the idea that 150 ISO are nearly tripod slow and full, or only for full sun photography, that's awesome. I had very little trouble getting the proper shutter speed for these photos. The bright pavement certainly helped, but I also think people have the idea that 400 ISO is the line for hand-holding. That might be true with a larger camera like the Mamiya RZ67, but the average 35mm and many medium format cameras can be used at this range. You have to be more careful when focusing wider f-stops, especially in medium format, but also tripods are a much more realistic option than you'd think. Maybe I'll do a video about this soon. That's great. And yeah, 50 isn't 100 ISO like I kind of labeled this video as, but it's in that range, and there aren't that many color films, especially now, to choose from, so I think it's an acceptable compromise. Okay. These days, if we're in 50 to 200, we're pretty much talking about the same speeds. Perfect. Are you able to get up the steps?
I can try.
You can take off the skates and get over there.
I can probably just crawl up.
Okay, right in front of me. You secure? Okay, awesome. All in all, I was happy with how the Lomography 100 film looked, especially, and the Cinestill 50D also. I've got a few more of those to share, but first I'd like to thank my patrons listed here on screen. For as little as $1 a month, you can join my Patreon and help make this channel a reality. Any financial support helps, and hopefully I can make it worth your while, if not through just constant video postings, but maybe some discounts on zines, which I've given, and more. Check it out. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna get that way back and get one right back here. One of my biggest complaints about the surviving color negative films is that they don't have a ton of saturation. Of course, that primarily pertains to the professional line of color negative films. I would say that Portrait 800 probably has the most saturation of the portrait films, but we're really pretty starved for nice contrasty saturated color film, and a lot of that is because of demand. Okay, that's the end of that roll, so I'm going to take a few on the other camera. Go back here. But it doesn't mean it has to be that way. We can say that, hey, we love films like Ektar. Can we get something like that in negative? And we sort of have that in Ektar, which actually I'll explore in a few minutes. So maybe we should get more into shooting slide film and not being so afraid of it. And I know the price isn't great, but you know, Portrait 800 is pretty freaking expensive too. So, and again, as I've pointed out in past videos, pretty much all film is not as expensive as we play it up to be. But now I've already talked over that these last set of negative photos you saw were shot on Pro Image 100, a great 35mm ultra budget fine grained film stock that we overlook a little too often. I'll start here. I'm gonna start close because I'm blind. And really, this second setup we did on this adjacent parking lot as the sun started setting and more warm light came out really highlighted that Pro Image 100, while more desaturated than say an Ektar, has more contrast than your average portrait film, and it does a good job of showing that. Now, I shot the rest of my roll of Portrait 100 here, but also switched to Ektar 100 and the Bronica. So the reason I wanted to do these films is because Pro Image is definitely a much more portrait-based film, but Ektar is known not to be a portrait film, and that you always hear about the red skin and everything. So while that's partially true, I didn't find it to be entirely true on this session, although I did have a couple of shots that were kind of reddish. But here are the Pro Image images, and you'll see that just a hint of desaturation. It's not as brilliant as Ultramax, but it's also a little more contrasty than Portrait. And here's my Ektar shot starting. Notice that nice warm look, no red skin, ultra fine grain. That's great. Oh my god.
Is it okay?
Yeah, the GoPro took it. And yeah, the G1 was okay. The GoPro got a little dent on the top corner on the little rubber protective area, but everything's fine. It happens, and I started using a strap more regularly on my G1 because it's just not balanced enough by itself, especially with a GoPro stuck on the top. I kept playing with this backlighting, really nice warm sunset light, and I definitely would have had more trouble doing this on slide film, of course, which is why it's nice to have Ektar, and why it's nice to not be completely afraid of Ektar. If I printed this in a dark room, I might have a harder time ignoring the more red intensity, but that's not the case yet. But since this is digital, it's pretty easy to pull that out and get a lot of the nice contrast and fine grain that would be missing in Portrait 160 even. And Portrait 800 is great, but also is definitely on the grainier side of things, which is great if you want a more retro feel, because Portrait 800 is a late 90s emulsion, so it's a little grittier than what you would find from an Ektar, which came out, I don't remember when, but not in the 90s. Of course, my Pro Image had run out by this point, so I decided to slightly cheat on the concept of this video again and shoot some Kodak Vision3 250D, which I did rate at 125 ISO though. Trying to look at this way. Because in short, you want to overexpose your cinema film if you're using it for stills. Anyway, the last of my Ektar shots, which I really enjoy, and I think the ultra fine grain and high saturation of Ektar really help these despite the occasional red skin appearance. And here's the lovely Vision3 250D, which I completely love, and I graded a little bit flatter, and it really worked for things on these. I haven't tried, making an enlargement print from this, but also that's not really what a lot of us do now. It's an interesting modern issue we have. Like, how are we editing our photos, and we should understand why. But also, we don't have to like prove anything to anyone. If we enjoy shooting film, we can just shoot it. So, you know, that's kind of what part of it comes down to. I could have shot this whole thing on a Bronica or a Contax, but I enjoyed shooting both. If I enjoyed shooting digital with this stuff still, I'm sure I could get away with that too, but it just really, to quote, I guess, does not spark joy. But what does spark joy is the contrast and color depth of this Vision 3 film, which is a huge plus to me in light of my previously mentioned lack of saturated professional films, because this definitely qualifies despite the additional obstacles of like ramjet. If you like what you see and want to see more, click on subscribe and turn on notifications, and I will see you soon. And don't forget to like the video. It actually helps quite a bit. I appreciate it. Bye.